it's exhausting when the only people who are doing the advocation are those who have actually lived that experience themselves. Because whilst it's great and it's lovely to have other people who have shared those similar experiences to sit and talk with and rant with and just feel like you can open up with, nothing changes if the people that have no idea what it feels like to live as that self are there to listen.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Blooming Late Scientists. As you know, this season is all about women in STEM. But today we're doing something a little bit differently. So as you can see, there's quite a few of us on the call. So we're running a panel discussion today. And I felt it was really important to get everybody involved in the discussion around kind of gender equity and equality. Because often what we see is that there are huge discussions between women and groups of women, and men are not included in those discussions, which ends up isolating another group of people, which is not what we want to do. So it's really important for me today to get everybody involved. So I'm not going to do the introductions. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. But I just wanted to say thank you all for being here. And why don't we start with you, Gregory, if you can just introduce yourself and tell us maybe why you decided to pursue a career in STEM in the first place?
Sure. So I am a scientist by training. I came to Germany 12 years ago, and I think that's where I tick off my career in science started. I don't know. Sometimes a scientist thinks their career in science starts when they start their PhD, but it really started when I was like 4 or 5 years old. I don't know. You would find me underneath an olive tree, staring at everything around me and just being curious about it. So a career in STEM was, as they say, inevitable. This is where everything channeled, and that's where I ended up. I did a PhD, worked in different labs, work in industry now, and I'm pursuing coaching as well, also just part of being curious. So it never stops, and it chooses us at some point, I think.
Yeah. I love the fact that you were laying under an olive tree, like channeling your inner Newton, waiting for the olive to fall. Amber, what about you?
Yeah, so I really resonate with what Greg said about STEM choosing us, because throughout my childhood, quite niche, but I always knew that I wanted to study genetics and genomics. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and it's always fascinated me as to how that even happened. But on results day, I changed my mind at 17 years old, went down the accounting and finance path, hated every second of it, tried to endure that for the very start of my career, and now have stumbled back into STEM, which I think is where I kind of always meant to be, but I just wasn't sure in what capacity, because being in a lab didn't really resonate with what I felt my life would look like. So now I am the founder of Moxie, which is a recruitment agency for the genetics and genomics space. So I'm back, but in a very different way to what I would have thought at 17.
Yeah. I love what you do, I have to say. And I think you make such a good point there anyway, that we have these fixed ideas about what we think we should do and what we've got to do. And then our careers end up being totally different. And you find your passion just by trying out different things, don't you?
Oh, yeah. I've tried and failed a lot, but that's the point.
You have to try and fail. So moving on to you, Philipp, what about you? Why did you decide to have a career in STEM?
I think you also mentioned this tree, and I was also sitting under a tree, and I was thinking about why does an apple hurt me more than an olive? So I wanted to understand what's going on. And then I had a bad private experience. My mother got diagnosed breast cancer, a very severe form, and her life was saved by trastuzumab. So a biotechnological drug, an antibody, and this brought me into biotech. And having studied physics, it was about, okay, what can I do? Can I develop an own drug? but it's tough, Developing a drug is tough. It's lucky punch, takes you ages. And I was thinking about what can I do better? Where's my leverage? And this is why I now make the invisible visible, so that scientists can drug the undruggable. So it's biophysical tools for drug discovery. Still trying to understand what's going on, why not only Apple, but also diseases hurt so much. So this is my driving thing since the very beginning.
I love that. And I also love that that drove you to move not just into STEM, but from physics into the kind of biological space. We're definitely seeing more of that now. I don't know if in companies, I've seen so many companies now looking to recruit physicists in biology companies, which I think is changing the narrative. And just, I guess it kind of shows the technologies that we're looking for moving forward. But thank you so much, all of you, for sharing that. So digging into the topic of the show, which is women in STEM and gender equality, the kind of first question I wanted to ask you all was, how have you seen gender diversity in STEM change over the years or over the course of your career? Are we improving? What has that looked like for you? So, Amber, let's start with you.
I think it depends on the scientific domain, firstly. So, as you were just speaking about, physics, for example, is very male dominated, whereas things like biological sciences are getting a lot better. And I actually saw recent data which said that there are more women entering biological sciences than men. But when I do, field service engineer hires, for example, there are just no women at all. So I think access to STEM has definitely bettered over my last decade of recruitment, but what hasn't is retaining women in STEM. And the further and further you get up the ladder, the less and less women that are in terms of representation and just being there. So I think we're getting better, but we're not there yet in certain areas.
You would be amazed how many times that theme has come up already in this show. And I think everyone agrees that the issue is often not that women don't move into STEM, but actually that they don't stay there for various reasons. So it's really interesting you say that. And just expanding on like that, what do you think the issues are there? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, if you look at the hiring, once you're in the workforce, it kind of seems like promotions are often associated with more masculine traits. So, openly advocating for yourself, telling the world about your achievements. And often these aren't things that come as naturally to women, because when I was in leadership, for example, for a very short space of time, the women on my team, their barriers were always themselves and the imposter syndrome and the lack of confidence. Whereas the men, it was something totally different. So I think that promotions are difficult for women. I think that the workforce isn't built for us to childbear and maintain our sanity and not hit a level of burnout. And not that every woman, wants to have a family, but if they do, it kind of feels like you have to decide it's an or rather than an and.
Yeah. I mean, from my own perspective, I did my PhD when I was much older. So I didn't finish my PhD until I was 40. So I had children when I started, they were 12 and 15. And I was told by someone who I worked for in my PhD that for me to be successful, I had to behave as though I did not have children. It was the only way for me to progress, just to pretend, don't have a family, work the same as everyone else, because I had to prove a point to everyone else. So I can see how that is an issue. I have heard of the same issue for men, I have to say, but maybe not in the same balance. But I have spoken to men who feel the same, like when they have children, particularly if they're heavily involved in childcare. So, based on that, Gregory, what are your thoughts?
I'm trying to think back to when we were in university. I mean, that's where it started. I remember at school, there were as many friends that were women that were interested in science, definitely. And if I think back, some of the brightest minds I knew in science, like at school, they pop up, and some of them I still know to this day. And then through our bachelor's and master's degree, we go through this type of educational pipeline, sort of, in the beginning. And I still saw, I haven't, ever made a point of counting in a sense, but I always saw women there. I always had professors that were women. Some of them gave us the best lab courses. I remember that because this is me. Like, I remember more a person that would teach me something practical than something theoretical. And some of them were brilliant at that. And then my mind goes to, after that, my wife and I did our PhD in the same lab. So this is interesting because it's almost the same time period. We started around 2000. I started 2012. She started 1 year before that. She did a postdoc. She went to industry. She is now a QM manager in biotech. So, but what I observed there, which is what Amber noticed as well, is that women and men behave differently there. On the topic of child leave, for example, it was very interesting for me to see how hard she pushed herself in the last months of pregnancy to deliver something for work, because she is that person, But when your body and mind are going through something, whether it be a pregnancy or something different, any change we're going through, there's some things we need to notice. And there, she was harsh on herself. No, I need to display this type of energy so that I am worthy of having my job and having my child. And that was so painful for me sometimes to experience and see happening in front of me. The most interesting part is that I know her company, I know her CEO, he is fully supportive. That's the interesting part. That I've known this person for 12 years, actually, her CEO. And so what I'm trying to say is sometimes the environment can be supportive, but women in STEM might still have double thoughts. And that is a bit painful.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely kind of backs up what Amber was saying about often women being their own block, and those issues being internal a lot of the time. But obviously there are also external factors still. Philipp, I'd be interested to hear from you, because obviously as a CEO of a company and someone who's had a varied career, how have you seen that change over the course of your career?
Especially I see it with my two boys in school. There I see more, especially in Germany, more and more women being much better than men. Where I see this is a good development. And I think in 50 years we will talk about the poor man being behind, I think, when I look at the development in school. So it's changing for the better. This is good. What I also think is my role as CEO is I hear a lot of excuses, because we all know every person is unique, everyone is different. When you know that a person is an introvert for what reason, whatever, as a leader, it's your duty to enable this person to work as good as possible. So it's not about the person, it's about also the leadership. It's about you have to take care of everyone and discover the potential, no matter of gender, age, culture. And it's a lot of excuses for the people. It's a man, it's a woman, it's different. No, it's an excuse. It's your task to get from everyone the best, to make the best performance for your company. And I mean, it's 50% of our population. It's just a bad excuse for me. It makes no sense. Maybe there is also fear-driven, some old patterns that you think you have to be better or whatever, and or you have to be not as good or whatever. They're old patterns, a lot of fear somehow, because it makes no sense. When you read all these leadership tools, and we all do, you have to take care of the individual person, and it's not happening somehow. Yeah. Also, what I also realized in that, it's a bad fact, but we used it for the benefit of our company. So a lot of, especially in our disciplines, companies are reluctant to hire women between the age of 30 and 40s if they don't have a kid yet.
Yes.
Because the argument is you hire them, say out of probation periods, they get pregnant, you invested 1 year and then they are gone. And we use this fact to specifically hire women in this age because competition is smaller for us. And it was a very good idea, I think. It was great. So we got a lot of good, great people, no problems, still at the company, leadership team, great performance. But it was even women in recruiting, in HR, recommend you not to hire women. And this is what I don't understand. It's nature. It's works, and you can adapt to it. It's all the excuses. It's a leadership task for me.
I think we need more CEOs like you, Philipp. If we could clone you, that would be good. But it's so interesting. You've made so many interesting points there. And one of the ones that I'll pick up on that is coming up actually in a few weeks' time on this podcast is how women also don't support women. And you've just actually highlighted that issue there. And I experienced the same, what you were saying with, so when I finished my PhD, I was 40, and companies that I applied to didn't directly ask me, but they found out that I had children, but that my children were older. So I was 40 and my children were done. And one of them actually said to me, "This makes us want to hire you because we know you'll never have more children." And they actually said that. And I was really shocked because it did make me think, so if I was this age and I hadn't had children, then you wouldn't hire me. But the other point that you made, in that it is silly that we have these ideas. I wish everybody could see it like that, because there's so many leaders that think they see it like that, but they don't. Or they say those words, but they don't act out those things. And that's why I really wanted you on here, because it was clear from the things that you talk about on LinkedIn that you're invested in just treating everybody the same and giving them what they need, which is so important. So the other thing I want to talk about is, so back early on in my career, I was told by a couple of people that the reason I was successful is because I knew how to behave like a man in business. And I remember at the time being quite naive and feeling like that was a compliment. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how many issues that causes, because one, it means that women have to behave in a very certain way to be successful, which is not true. And two, the idea that men have to behave like this strong, assertive, extroverted behavior to be successful. And that kind of narrative is dangerous in both ways. So I kind of wanted to ask what your experiences were of that. And Gregory, I'd love to start with you, because I know we've chatted about this before.
Where to begin? So for me, it usually started with something very simple. What comes to mind is a meeting with my boss's previous personal assistant. She was someone that was been with him for a very long time. And what I do when I want to try to understand the people I work with is I go to people that have known them the most. So I connected to her to try to understand what's better. How do I best communicate with him? How do I best connect with him? When is his free time? Is he angry before coffee in the morning? super important things for me to learn about how to treat people differently, how they're going to be receptive. What I usually heard from her is that in considering these things, I am too nice. So by displaying a receptive feminine energy, where I'm open to other ideas and creative in my approach of how I deal with people, because it is strategic to me. It is something that is done with the intention of better connecting to a person, truly connecting to them. That to her was too nice. So if that sets the mood or an example of what you mean, right?
Yeah,
And it is
absolutely.
assumed that if I am too nice, I cannot display a masculine energy in situations where I might need to. So it's an either or situation, black and white, limited in a sense.
Yeah. Amber, what do you feel about that?
It's an interesting one because when I look at my corporate career, I've either been or had too much masculine energy or not enough. And it's felt like a balance that I could never win. So, as an example, the first recruitment job that I went for, I didn't get because I was too confident, too assertive, which are qualities typically rewarded in men, right? But I think it can sometimes be perceived as abrasive for us women. So it's almost like you need to be confident, but not too confident. But then it's strange because as my career progressed and I moved into leadership, I was performing really well. We had the highest performing sales team in the business, and yet every quarter my feedback would be, you need to be harsher with your team, you need to have more authority with your team, and almost as if you need your team members to kind of not fear you, but for you to be up here and for them to be down here. And I don't know if that's because it's kind of a sales environment that it was more prevalent. But yeah, I've just felt like at every point in my career, I've either been too much of something or too little of something. And it's a constant battle that never ends, it's felt like.
Yeah, I can relate to that. But how do you, in your opinion, how do you overcome that?
Not care and let my results do the talking. Because it gets to a point where, you know, my team are happy, I have positive feedback from them. I'm obviously open to acknowledging that maybe I can be too, because you need some sort of authority as a leader, right? But yeah, obviously open to that feedback, but just getting to a point where I recognize that I will never win in the eyes of some leaders, perhaps, and that it's exhausting to constantly feel like you have to be on this just perfect balance of every aspect that makes up a good leader. So yeah, I just didn't care by the end, and I set up my own company, so I didn't have to.
Easiest way to deal with it.
Yeah, just quit.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a tricky balance, that's for sure. I've definitely experienced that in the past where any kind of show of emotion and it was like, oh,
She's crying again.
Don't do that. Yeah. Philipp, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this in terms of like the masculine energy and how we kind of are expected to play into those roles, both men and women.
I think you always have certain expectations, so to say, an image about a role, and it's in your head, and you have a lot of images about different roles. And as soon as someone doesn't fit in this image, you have a problem. If it's the one side or the other side, and there's always expectation, and this is a surprise. And this, and also, and you don't like surprises. You also don't like to go out of your comfort zone. So if someone leads differently than you do, and this person is equally successful or more successful, you have a problem. But you don't, it tells you have to go out of your comfort zone, you have to change, and you don't want to do so. And a different person, and the more different this person is, just by looking maybe different, the bigger the problem is for you. And the consequence is you have to change yourself. and this is a lot of work, and you don't want to do so. And I think this is we have this patterns in our brains because of society, because of history. Leaders are masculine. You read history books, and from the last maybe 2000, you have Cleopatra, you have Nofretete, but most of the leaders are masculine. And even reading history, watching old Hollywood films, establish a kind of picture, an image of leadership in your head. And you always have to fight against it. And this leadership image in your head was generated by men. So it's a masculine leadership. If you have more role models like Marie Curie, Lise Meitner, and also you learn more about them now. Taylor Swift, also superstars for the younger generation. It's a long story. We'll go over generations because we always fight against this old pre-installed patterns, and this consumes a lot of energy. And if you're stressed in your job, you avoid this additional fight, I think.
Yeah, because you've only got so much brain space or capacity to deal with things, so you can't always deal with everything. Your point there, though, about changing yourself, if you have these ideas about what leaders look like, how do you even start to do that?
Often I'm forced, because being a CEO of a company and having to hire people, I want to have the full potential. So I have to look at everyone. So I have to force myself. We talk a lot about that. We don't find enough high qualified employees. So I have to force myself to be able to recognize the potential in every person. So this is just a logical thing. And then I need a success story. It's tough. It's a learning. But as soon when I have my first success story, I can build on it. And this helps me. It activates my bonus system in the brain, and it helps me to install a new pattern. But for this, I need a success story. And often it's someone supporting me. I mean, if you live in an environment which is all masculine, everyone just punishes you. Being not so masculine, it's tough. So it means you have to also change your environment. Yeah. Because all alone doing an uphill battle. And for this, I like that this women networks, where you also help to share success stories, to enforce yourself that it's possible. And also men see then, okay, there are women networks, they are successful, they talk about it, they share it. And this helps, okay, but it takes a long time, but it helps to change the pattern.
Yeah. One of the points you said there was about women having groups where they kind of support each other and talk about their successes, which I think is really important. I am part of some of these groups. And that kind of brings up, the importance of role models. Like you said, Philipp, women need to see women in leadership and think, well, if they can do it, yeah, I can do it too. And that's just like the simplest form of it. But we know that there are lots and lots of groups forming about women in STEM now. There's more and more podcasts coming out, mainly to highlight women's successes, as you say. But how important is it, do you think, that men are part of this conversation? Amber?
Incredibly, because I've been part of female-only groups, not necessarily STEM-related groups, but sales, or I ran like a DE&I group at my previous company as type 1 diabetic, because I found that could kind of get in the way of my work sometimes. And it's exhausting when the only people who are doing the advocation are those who have actually lived that experience themselves, because whilst it's great And it's lovely to have other people who have shared those similar experiences to sit and talk with and rant with and just feel like you can open up with. Nothing changes if the people that have no idea what it feels like to live as that self are there to listen. And so I think like listening sessions, even within a company, are so important, where, you know, leaders, men, can just come in and listen. They don't even necessarily need to get involved, just to hear the lived experiences of women in STEM and how that's affected their everyday lives, I think is such a step forward. And yeah.
I love that idea of listening sessions. I'm not sure I've ever seen it. But I mean, I've obviously got limited experience in companies, but I'm sure it does happen.
Yeah,
But it
there's a
seems like something we
biotech
should
in
be pushing for.
there's a biotech in London who do an LGBTQ plus listening session, and they just said it's been amazing. And since then, they've also hired a chief diversity officer, which I just think sends such a powerful message and really like brings a level of professionalism. And, you know, okay, we're actually doing something with this to drive accessibility forward. So yeah, I just think progress requires kind of more work than collateral duty, for example.
Yeah. It's nice to hear of a company that has, say, like a diversity officer that actually means something rather than just putting it there to kind of be like a show. Because what's the point of that?
Yeah.
Like, it's just pointless, isn't it? So, Gregory, what are your thoughts? Because I know we talked about this previously about the kind of how important it is not to isolate certain groups when we have these discussions.
I mean, one thing that Philipp said was interesting is that first you look inwards, you understand a bit more about yourself. All of us, from when we are born till when we no longer exist, do that. If we stop doing that, if we stop, growing who we are, we're no longer receptive. We're no longer looking inwards at all, right? And as a leader that has to access, these parts of themselves to be able to lead, to be able actually to display their masculine energy in a balanced, healthy way, to be focused and determined, but still be receptive and open and creative. And then that will reflect in the entire culture. If a leader can accept who they are, people working in the organization think, well, maybe I can do that too. It opens up so much doors for so many people. And we're all going to display different traits of masculinity and femininity differently, regardless of our biological sex. We display traits from these energies differently, according to our life experiences, what we've been through, our parents. I have rejected masculinity for a part of my life, for example, because of my relationship with my father and my mother. So many complexities go into how these are shaped for every single one of us. So being inclusive also means allowing the person to just discover who they are. And don't resist it as an organization, but play a game of change management. Adapt to how they are growing, use these new abilities to the benefit of the organization. Throughout all of that, who cares if it's male or female?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Who does care? But I think there are a lot of companies that still do, unfortunately. So, Philipp, for you, why do you think it's important that we're all part of this conversation and not just women?
Yeah, we have to share our point of views. Some things, you're a different person, you do just see or understand the things differently and just touch them differently. And we have to understand, and this is only going on via conversation. I can only understand you if we talk about how you see it. And for this, we need the conversation. We have to accept that we are different, that we are different persons. And we have to find a common way how to communicate with each other, that we understand the same thing with the same, you say a word, but this word may mean a different thing for you or for me. So we have to talk with each other and say, hey, this is a problem. Sometimes it's like, sometimes you can, maybe in a man group, you can say you asshole, and it's absolutely fine because it's the way you communicate there. No one takes offense. And if you say in a different group, it's a big problem. And it's just that a different way of communication. And it needs, okay, it's a bad example, but I want to say it's, you have to talk with each other to understand each other better, because I have the opinions that a lot of bad behaviors comes out of old patterns of fear. And for this, talking with each other, if you talk, you get used to it, and then the fear vanishes. And then you get used to each other, and then you can really start to change the things.
How do you, as somebody who runs the company, how do you make sure that you have time to do those things? Because, I'm sure you're hugely busy. So how do you make time to listen to people and ensure that there is that diversity of thought?
I take my time because the most important thing, my leverage on my people, so 200 people, if they do good, we do good. Because I'm only one person, I have limited time. 200 people added up is much more time. So it's my most important task to shape the culture. So, for example, I had one meeting where a woman led the meeting, and we had a man behaving respectless in this meeting. And then afterward, I told him this was respectless. Please apologize to her. And this is a thing you have to do for your culture. And since he told me this, since 20 years in the business, this never happened to her. That a man from the management told another man from the management about a bad behavior, and that he should apologize for it. But there is where you start the culture. I mean, if you don't go in and say this is a bad behavior, this is against our culture, this person will not start to think about it, because maybe no one have ever said this to him. So he thinks maybe it's a normal pattern. It's not bad. It's just a usual pattern. So we have to stop. We have to immediately, as soon as it happens, we have to stand up and say, no, this is not acceptable. And I think this is lacking. We have to take the time and the energy for it, so that you can step in, or everyone has to speak up and say this is not a good behavior. And you have to have this energy because it's important. Because times is getting more complex, and to deal with this complexity, we need diversity. And as you soon have understood it, you will take your time for it, and then you will see the success. I'm really convinced by this.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. It's kind of amazing that you're like this, but this is such a big issue where actually people are too afraid to address certain issues. Like you said previously, there is a fear, and there's definitely a fear about talking about certain things or addressing certain issues, particularly within companies, because it's almost like if I talk about this, it's real. If I don't talk about it, it's not really happening. Amber, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for sharing that story, firstly. I really resonate with that. And I think I've felt in the past when situations such as that have happened, and perhaps a male had interacted with me in a way that I didn't appreciate and was disrespectful, that yes, there was an apology, but I sometimes don't feel like, number one, they believed that apology, or two, even knew why they were apologizing. And that was what was so exhausting, is it just kind of felt like an empty word with no substance and no care to seek to understand why that made me feel that way. And I was just branded as, being too emotional perhaps in that moment and taking it too personally, when in reality, they were being disrespectful. So yes, whilst these apologies are important, I think what's even more important is understanding why you shouldn't be behaving in that way in the first place. And that starts with us having open conversations, not just within female groups, but with everyone.
Yeah. I mean, the theme that keeps coming up is that we need to talk about things
Yeah.
more. Let's hope companies do it.
But like you said, it's
Gregory,
difficult. Sorry. And I think
no,
with like any form of advocation or talking about any form of diversity, whether that be race, sex, whatever, I think people have this sense of perfectionism and like getting things wrong and being politically correct. And I think talking, whether it's not 100% right, is better than pretending, as you mentioned, that it doesn't exist.
yeah, we do. I do think we do all have fears that we might say the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly around diversity and inclusion, there is a little bit of a fear that you'll speak and say something wrong. But you're definitely right. You can't just not say anything. Gregory, what are your thoughts around that?
I think at an organizational level, it comes down to if some of us are accepting change and others are not. It goes down to as simple as that for me. Those who are not accepting change are disallowing the movement of others or the flow of others, therefore the flow of the organization itself. They pull it back in a sense if they are resisting the change in other people or how other people behave or how other people want to work. So for them to understand that they are sort of blocking others is super important. So it'll go both ways, like from the base, those who want change and are resisting change to learn more about themselves. When they learn more about themselves, they will connect better to others. They will have tools that allow one person to say to the other, this doesn't feel good. If you behave this way, it doesn't feel good. As simple as that, not to go out and talk about details. We always go into the details when it comes to things like this, what are the rights of this group or that group or whatever. You're making another human being not feel good in their work environment. So simple.
Yeah.
Please try to understand why. And then at the top level down, if we're talking about a company with a board, for example, for that board to display a balanced amount of male and female energy, which is gonna be hard if all of the board is male, even if those males know each other and themselves. It's a matter of numbers when it comes to it, right? Do all boards need to be 50-50? No, honestly, I don't think so. But this will reflect in a company's culture. If the balance is at the board level, you'll see it at the culture level, and then it's okay. It means that board has a balanced mix. And that's why it's also important, I think, not to only involve, the base, but the top, and more importantly, the middle part. People in middle management, because this is where communication usually goes really bad.
Yeah.
If they cannot really convey well the values of leadership that is actually, maybe leadership is actually inclusive and middle management is not. And they are not able to, communicate that throughout the organization. So it just goes to show it's every single person that's there is a part of it.
That's such an interesting thought. And I mean, I definitely agree with what you're saying, that it starts, the board needs to be diverse. And I agree, it doesn't have to be like, oh, we must have an equal split 50-50 for the sake of having an equal split. Like it just has to be diverse, because we all know that having a board that displays only masculine energy leads to a pretty much failing company in the end. The middle management part was really interesting because that's easier to do in a small company, but how do you do that when your company starts getting much bigger? How do you keep that line of communication going?
Middle managers need to be coaches. To me, it's as simple as that. People in middle management need to have coaching skills. Give them that, teach them that. These are teachable skills. I'm learning them now. It is not impossible. Every person can learn them. Just give them these skills because they include everything. Deep listening, not listening only to respond. Dear God, every single middle manager I've faced almost in my life, more the males than the females, I will admit this statistically, but they were only listening to respond. There was always a but, yeah, but give them coaching skills. They will better distribute everything throughout the organization. That's my view.
Yeah, I think coaching is so important. We've talked about this a lot. And I guess that leads me into my penultimate question, which is how important do you think coaching and mentorship is in terms of promoting diversity within companies? Amber, can we start with you?
Incredibly. And apologies that I keep bringing it back to personal experience, but I think a part of why I left previous companies was because of a lack of mentorship and a lack of coaching from someone that not only looked like me, but kind of felt things like me. And this isn't to say, again, that every male doesn't exhibit that sense of feminine energy, but we just had such different experiences. And the further and further I got up the ladder, the less and less mentors there were that were accessible to me. And you can just feel like an alien. I have been sat in boardrooms before where I was the only female and, there were 14 other men. And I just felt like, what am I doing here? Like, just so out of place and so underrepresented. And I couldn't even get like my voice or my opinion across at times. And it kind of felt like a battle of this like abrasive energy at times. And if I'd have had a mentor that could listen to understand rather than just listen to respond, as Greg was saying, which is how I felt when I've had mentors that haven't necessarily lived my experience, gosh, that would have meant the absolute world to me. And I think I would have progressed not only professionally, but probably personally a lot quicker than I have done. And since building my own business, seeking my own mentors who are female and who are kind of like 1 to 2 steps ahead of me has been the best thing that I have ever done for my career and for my happiness. So, yeah, words cannot explain how important it is to have mentors that, have lived your experience.
It's all like representation, isn't it? If you can't see it, then it's like it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I think when you were saying before about, why do women, and I think Greg said, even if you work in a supportive environment, we often feel like we have to do more. And I think that is predominantly due to that lack of representation. And when you look at leadership websites on biotech pages, it's just a sea of sameness. And yes, you may have the odd chief people officer or chief HR officer that's a woman, but no wonder we have that sense of self-doubt because we can't see anyone around us that's achieved that before. So yes, the environment can be supportive, but if that representation isn't there, it's still impossible to see, let alone feel.
Yeah, definitely. Philipp, how do you see the kind of mentoring and coaching approach, particularly as, being the CEO of a business with lots of people in it?
Yeah, listening here, I would say Amber is a perfect mentor for me. But
Vice versa. I'll take you up on that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've been not a big fan of mentorship and coaching for 38 years to say. I think I would say I even hated it. But when I finally convinced myself or got convinced to give it a try, the feedback I have from my teams is now it changed me for the better. And now I mostly go for very, let's say my actual coach, she's a woman. She is younger than me and she works at Walt Disney. So
Wow.
far away from my industry to get a completely different point of view. She's also has an Asian origin. So very different to get a completely different point of view on the aspect. I think there is a lot of, it's tough to, it's it was also she was recommended to me because there's so many offers for coaching and mentorship. It is too much for me to make a choice. But this really helps me to have someone where I can just say, okay, this person said this thing to me. How do you understand it? Do you understand it the same way I do? Or what's your point of view on it? So it's a completely different point of view because of all the background helps me a lot to understand other persons better. And this is also a big personal gain. It's a good thing for both sides. It's also my feedback I have. It's a win-win situation for both sides, and then it keeps itself going. So I think it's and for every few years you need a different mentor because you grow, the world changes, the market changes, and to adapt to it, you do need always different people for different situations. So but I would say it's a big, big, big win.
I really appreciate your honesty in saying that it was something that you hadn't thought about for so long. And it's nice to hear how you've changed your perspective. But also, I love that the differences here is like sometimes you need a mentor that's totally different to you. And yet, Amber, we were saying that sometimes it's helpful to have someone who's kind of walked the path before you, so the same, which goes to show that we're all looking for different kinds of mentorship in our career and that it's not one size fits all. In the interest of time, I have one final question to ask you all, and that is, what is one thing we need to do to make sure we ensure diversity and equality, particularly when it comes to women in science, moving forward? Gregory.
This goes on many levels for me. One, I have daughters. And I would like them to be able to do whatever it is that their heart tells them. And then I hope that their mind or their masculine energy drives it to the maximum, to whatever they want and need. Here's a surprising fact. About 80% of people that approach me for coaching are women. Men are less likely to be open to coaching because we're not taught to look inwards. And there's a certain, I don't want to say pain, but there's something about looking inwards that's different than what we experience externally in our lives. So there, I try to be as supportive as I can for what they need in an environment that's created for coaching. As someone has received mentoring and coaching, there's overlaps between them. It's very interesting and it's very delicate. And the person I'm working with as a mentor now is the fantastic Jackie Rigby, Dr. Jackie Rigby, and it's because she is a master of change management. And that's where I'm going with everything that's interesting to me, connecting to people and so on and so forth. I've worked with coaches that are men and women, and I've had mentors that are men and women, and I've received different things from all of them. So just being open to that as a man to speak to a man and or woman as a coach or mentor is going to bring everyone so much into their growth and personal development. So I think they are a crucial part of growth.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we might need another episode just to talk about that, to be honest. So we'll save that for the next one. Amber, what do you think? Like, what's one thing you think we need to do? I realise there's more than one, but let's narrow it down.
Yeah, that's a tough question, Martina. But I'll come at it from a recruitment angle because this happens to me a lot where CEOs come to me to make diversity hires for them. But when you dig a little deeper, they don't actually have any form of supportive infrastructure for these hires to thrive. And it's a performative exercise more so than anything. So just the basic things like having fair paternity leave. And I think this is particularly top of mind for me recruiting in America. The basics are just not there. So yeah, just having an environment and an infrastructure that can actually retain women in STEM rather than just attracting them and them leaving 3 years later.
Such a good point. And I think that's something, all companies need to think about. But it's interesting that you talk about the cultural differences there, like within the US, and I'm sure other countries. Again, another episode that we may need to have. Philipp, what about you? What's the one thing that you think we need to do to make sure the conversation keeps going around equality and diversity?
Yeah, for me, what I decided for myself is that I now in the future, I want to always raise my voice when I see something going on against our values. I think with this, I will have a big impact. I'm not done it always, and I feel bad about it. But I have this plan for the future that I will now always raise my voice and say, no, this is not okay, stop it. And to really walk the talk here.
Yeah, I love that. I always think, it's important to reflect and look at where we've come from, but I'm a big believer that you shouldn't look back and regret behaving or not behaving in certain ways, because you're not really going in that direction anymore, are you? You're moving forward. So reflection is good, but I love the fact that you've said, moving forward, you'll stand up for these ideas. So before we finish, I do want to say thank you to all of you for taking the time to come on here and have this discussion, and also have difficult discussions, which a lot of people don't want to talk about. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And I know everyone listening will appreciate that. So thank you so much for your time. And to everyone else listening, we will see you again next week for another episode of Blooming Late Scientists.